Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the second session around public life and public space tools. My name is Olivia, and I'm coming to you from Gehl Studio in New York. And for those of you that are familiar, or not familiar, we are an urban design studio based in Copenhagen and doing a lot of work with some of you on Urban 95 and designing cities from the first 95 centimeters of life. And but these workshops are more specifically around public life tools and how you measure life of a space to then make design and strategy decisions based on the desired goals. And so in our first session we had I did an overview of what the public life tools are and a little bit about how you measure the relationship between form and behavior. And now today I'm going to talk a little bit about how you go from data to stories to insights and walk you through a little bit of that. And so I had set up kind of a test count for those of you who joined the first session to collect a little bit of data. And so now you can kind of see this dashboard that I'm sharing right now is what it looks like when after the data is collected. This is what comes back on the back end and how we can start to analyze the conditions. We have very low data collection here, but usually it would be pretty high volumes. But just some of the things that we measure are, for instance, what's the age and the gender of people moving in a space, who's staying, what is the perceived age and gender, what's the posture of people staying, what are people doing when they're choosing to spend time. And so we create from our public life app, are able to create these online dashboards and then create some stories and some design decisions based on that. So I'm going to walk you through kind of a couple examples of how we've gone from data to insight to some design and strategy recommendations here. And if you have any questions, please just post them in the chat. I will do my best to answer them as they come up. But the first example I'm going to show you is around COVID in public space. And so this is a project that we did in COVID-19 around 4 cities in Denmark, and understanding, what is the experience of the pandemic and how is that changing how people are relating to their neighborhoods and their communities and the public spaces. And so this is an example of how we use public life data to get some insights about how the space is functioning. Sorry, I'm just need to allow some cookies here. And so, something, as you can see, the public life data that's here, we went out and collected this data in a couple different cities, and we're able to just get, kind of a snapshot of how life has changed and what some of the highlights from the data are before and after. So there's also a time scale to measuring, getting a snapshot of public life data of what something was like before an instance happened, or before, a plaza was implemented or a street was designed. And we can understand, what's the gender difference across these different, after the change has happened, before and after. What's the age difference? So we noticed that during the pandemic, play and exercise in public space changed really dramatically and really, increased, and people are really using public space for exercise in ways that they hadn't beforehand. We also understood that, the time of day really shifted, and that there was less kind of like drastic peaks throughout the day, as we saw before COVID and the weekday, that it was a little bit more spread out. We also, were able to understand that before the pandemic, using these public life tools and being able to map activity, that before the pandemic, a lot of activity in these cities was cafe seating and kind of pay to play commercial activity. And then during the pandemic, it really changed to more public use, and the way that people are using space kind of became more open. Another thing we talked about last time is measuring age in a public space. And, getting a snapshot of who is spending time and what the proper ages, or what's the age distribution of people in a space, really helps understand how accessible things are. If you don't see a lot of presence of elderly people or children in a space, that's usually an indicator that there's some comfort and maybe some safety things lacking. Last time we talked a little bit about urban quality, and there's sort of 3 tiers of urban quality criteria, and the base being protection and safety. And if people don't feel protected and safe, then they won't come to a space. And then there's a second layer of comfort, and if people don't feel comfortable, then they won't spend time there. And looking at kind of the more vulnerable, so to speak, age groups really gives a strong indication of if the safety and comfort are met. Of course, with COVID, we were able to, there's other factors at play with public health, but in general, we were able to see that children and elderly in public space was generally increasing, which is kind of a good sign for cities and healthy cities, and people really needing to use the space. And so these dashboards here that I'll show, I think there's maybe a little bit of a lag in my screen, but this is what it looks like on the back end of when we go out and collect data with our Public Life app, and we're able to create these dashboards, these interactive dashboards, and understand not only some of these ethnographic questions like who is spending time in terms of age and gender, and when are they there, and how many are they, and what are they doing there. But we're also able to spatialize it and understand and really kind of zoom into a specific area and understand the life of a specific public space, and how that maybe changes what the age distribution is in one space versus another space. So this is just a little bit of an example of how we use our data and how we process it. And I'm going to now open a presentation and talk a little bit about storytelling and share some examples of going from this data to actually to insights, and how we can use public data to kind of humanize and make design decisions that are based in the everyday experience, and help give a little bit more rigor and kind of data, I guess, to making these decisions that are really important. And I think as urban experts, as a lot of you all are, some things that you feel intrinsically, like we should pedestrianize the street, or we should provide more seating here, or things that maybe feel a little bit obvious to some, but to others it actually takes a little bit of convincing. So I think this was where the storytelling piece comes in, to have some data behind it, and convince people to get behind the ideas, and bring people onto the table that aren't already there. So if you just bear with me 1 second, I'm going to pull up another presentation. So telling a little bit about, from collecting data to telling stories, how we get there. And I think, the reason why we do this is in the beginning, is to inform our project goals and to build urgency and really create the support. And like I was saying, get the stakeholders that are needed to be on board, get them behind the process. And, from a design perspective, it's able to really engage with the community and unearth some human needs, and assess the design and the project based on research. And then, on the other side of after the design has been implemented, it's really important to collect data to understand what success looks like, and if this project has been successful in terms of the project goals, and but also where it's falling behind and where it can be improved. So I'm going to walk through 2 case studies of 2 projects in the US, and how data has been really successful in, telling the success of a project story. And so this is a project in Lexington, Kentucky, and of understanding, what a community needs, and how kids can be invited to spend time in public space. And so this is a city in the south of the US. It's a mid-sized city. There's maybe 50,000 people that live here. And, in the beginning, we saw that only 5% of people spending time in public space were under 14 years old, even though we know that across the city, 18% of residents were under 14 years old. So there's a gap between, who is being invited to spend time in this space and who is actually, who actually lives there. So, we did a public life study, as maybe some of you heard in the previous presentation, that's really about, getting on the ground and understanding what is the human experience of this place, and not looking at it from a bird's eye view of, on paper, how many people live here, but actually going to this space and how many children are there spending time in this place. And so we went on the ground and observed who is spending time here. And we're really able to see that, in this park here, there's a lot of children spending time. There's a big fountain here that had, signs to not swim, but a lot of children wanting to swim because it's a very hot city, even though, it was technically not allowed. And, very few places with kids designed in mind. So feeling that it's a little bit unsafe, but there's a latent desire and demand for children to spend time. And so, what we were able to observe is that, we have this park that's not a playground, but we have a lot of children spending time here. And then right across the street, we actually do have a playground, but no children spending time here. And so understanding kind of this desire versus what's there helped us, formulate some ideas for how we might do an intervention that makes children feel invited to spend time and meets their needs and their desire for water play in this instance. So this is the park across the street, and a pilot project that, we introduced called Splash Jam that brought the water and the desire for children's play over, but in a safe way, right? And allowed children to play and for the community to mix. And so at the outset of the project, these were the project goals: to bring more people to the area, so to increase use in this park that was being underused, to invite diversity. This was a project situated at the edge of two very distinct neighborhoods that have very different economic income and race levels, and actually weren't mixing with one another. So that leads to the third goal of encouraging civic mixing. And then the fourth one is to really foster a sense of pride and ownership and make people feel invited, and that this is a space that's theirs, and not something that was kind of brought into them, but something that they could take on as their own. And then the last one, just to overall increase people spending time in the park and the diversity of people spending time in the park. And so, in the way that we're talking about how data can help tell stories and convince people to be on board, we measured, before and after, 0 kids spending time in this park, and then after, how people feel about it, and, able to get the data point that, 94%, an overwhelming majority of people feel really positively about the space. We're also able to, use public life data to show the differences of before and after. That, before this pilot was implemented, we only had 1 person staying per hour, and during the Splash Jam, we had 23 people staying per hour. So just again, having this data to really, maybe intrinsically we all know that providing a space for kids to play, that feels like a good idea. At certain points you have a lot of people behind you, but maybe because of logistics or technicalities, it feels like, oh no, it's not possible for this to become permanent, or, because of permitting or safety or whatever, there's red tape, right? And there's reasons to say no to this. But when we measure people and what we really care about, we're able to very clearly illustrate how this has a positive impact on communities and on neighborhoods. We're also able to, and this is, if you joined the first session, we talked, about different methods, and one of those methods being intercept surveys and getting a sense of perception and sentiment and how people feel about a space, and a little bit more, of behaviors beyond just the observational and ethnographic of, how people are using it on a more specific level. So we're able to ask people around their visits, and how that, really drastically shifted from people, mostly never going to this public space or going very rarely, to people going daily and weekly, and actually becoming a part of their daily life. Also talked a little bit about civic mixing, and how we can use intercept surveys and targeted online surveys to to measure, to measure how different groups are interacting with each other. And so, as I said, this park is sitting kind of at the cross of two really diverse neighborhoods with very different income and educational levels. And how before kind of one certain type of demographic was represented, and then after we were able to really see that a really wide range of income levels were represented at this park, as well as educational attainment. Another thing we ask people a lot is about to the degree of social mixing, of do you run into anyone here, or do you meet anyone that you didn't plan to meet here? And 1 in 3 said that they did, which is extremely high for a public space of what of social mixing in that sense. So again, just using intercept surveys and stories and talking to people on the ground can maybe sometimes feel a little bit softer or more qualitative, but there is ways to pull data from that, and again tell stories that really make the case for higher quality urban environments. And I'm going to continue on and tell a story about Philadelphia and the porch swings. So this is a train station, and building on kind of the pilot projects is similar in the way that I showed in Lexington, Kentucky, how it's been successful with testing something temporary out, and we're able to get data that actually now the city is they've had various iterations of the Splash Jam pilot, and it's becoming permanent. And this is a case that I'll share from Philadelphia, where they've actually done that already, and it has become permanent. And really collecting people first data has made the case for that. And so this is in Philadelphia. It's a city in the northeast of the US, and this is their main train station. So trains coming from all over the region, coming from New York City and Boston, and a lot of people commuting in and out of here every day. And there was this parking lot beforehand where there was really high safety concerns, and at night there was an increase in violence and crime. And so Gehl was engaged to do a public life study of the area and understand, what are maybe some design moves that we can make to increase safety and increase comfort in this area. And actually, this is what it looks like today. And so, how that went about is really understanding, as I've mentioned before, that these public life conditions of what are people doing when they choose to spend time here, and that can start to inform some of the design decisions of, what might people want to do, and what's a pilot that we could introduce that would make sense in this space and builds on the life that's already there. And so, we did a couple different pilots here, and there was a first round of amenities that were deployed, of movable chairs and planters and things that are actually quite cheap, but easy to test out and get feedback and see how people are responding to it. And so that's something that, we put in some different types of furnishings and starting to respond to the latent desire for spontaneity and play. And then, understanding how that changes with pedestrian activity, and how that, from a baseline, people were really not spending time there, we're more moving through. And then after, understanding that people had really this desire for something kind of relaxing and playful. So our studio designed this sort of lounge chair to nod to that play and spontaneity, but also, recognize the function of the space, that it is a train station. There is, a lot of people waiting and spending time here kind of in a transitional space. And so we tested out from the movable seats that were here and these lounge chairs, and understood that we had a lot of positive feedback from them. Building on that, that's where the design of the porch swing really came out. And, in 1 year, we had something like 150,000 visitors and people posting photos on social media and really claiming this as their own, which is something, that was not done before. Before, this was a place that people really feared. And now it's really a place that people love. And so having things like this, 130% increase of visitation in the off-peak hours, so not just the travel times, really makes the case for this to become permanent and for the city to keep investing in this space, and that the transformation is possible, and to go from something that is feels scary and daunting to people to something that is beloved and is of the community. And so, another way that we collect data, and I talked a bit about this in the last session, is the social media analysis and understanding, where people take photos and how they do that. And I think this can give a really great sense of kind of ownership and sentiment of where people feel a sense of belonging in the space. And there's a lot of nuances to that, right? And who feels welcome where, and what belonging really means. But social media is kind of a crowdsourced way to start on that, of understanding how people are relating to a space and kind of what they value and what they want to photograph. And so, from data to telling stories, we can do a lot of different things, right? So identifying, being able to communicate back the impact that these projects have made is a really big part of it. The examples that I just shared, there's really hard data around, how this has positively impacted communities. The other thing that we can do is to identify areas that maybe could use more improvement. Could use more improvement. It's also a way to inspire, right? And make the case for future funding opportunities, to say, we tried this out in a space that had a similar problem, and we have some hard data on how it actually changed things. I think sometimes when there's problems with urban space, or people are wanting something different, but there's a lot of fear and barriers to getting that done. By telling stories with project data, you really can start to move the needle on that, and start to understand and attract some people that would be interested in making making another project and making the case for future funding opportunities. And so I'm going to skip this one, actually. But I think, so this is a project that we did in Santa Monica on a pedestrian mall, and being able to not only understand just the public life and how it's impacting people's daily life and quality of life, but also talk with businesses and communicate back to other stakeholders, right? That maybe are have other motives and other interests that are going to further their project and their process, but So understanding kind of who the stakeholders are in the room, and being able to collect data and tell stories to appease those people as well, and to make the case for the project from different perspectives. And again, we talked about making the case for future funding opportunities. This is another project in West Palm Beach, is the city in Florida in the US, and this was an abandoned lot that there was a lot of safety concerns, and people were really afraid to do something there and to test something out, and thought that the furniture would be stolen or things like that. But after implementing something and talking to people and getting a sense of people actually feel very safe here and feel a sense of ownership, the city was able to see, the community is taking stewardship over this, and it actually is worth it for us to keep investing. I think also, another way, again, with this like social media analysis, to, make your project memorable and special, of, is something that people are capturing and wanting to include in their daily life. And inspire others, right? So hopefully you all have heard about parking day and parklets, and this is something started by the users in our the people in our San Francisco studio. But being able to inspire change and show how we go from one parking space to a lot of different public life has inspired kind of a worldwide movement of reclaiming urban curb space for people. So now I'm going to talk just a little bit about kind of what makes a compelling story and what the elements of that are. But I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. So let me just read these really quick. So somebody said, when we talk about public life and quality, it is the sense of the place, the quality of public space that is being assessed. In your opinion, what is it that brings people to these places? So I think this is something we touched on a little bit in the first session, but there's something about safety, right? And we talked about the urban quality criteria, and there kind of being 3 tiers of people's needs that get people to stay in a space and attract them to a space. And the first is safety. So if people don't feel that they are protected from traffic, they're protected from violence and crime at different times of the day, then they won't go to a place. And the next layer, which I think to answer your question is the most important piece, is about comfort. And that's about things like, are there places to sit down and places to sit down with a view where people can watch other people? Is there an opportunity to talk and to listen and to share stories? Is there opportunities for children to play? Things like that. So that's something that you can actually look up on our website. But I think, in short, what attracts people to high quality public space is pretty simple. It is this comfort piece of being able to, engage with other humans and engage with their environment, and, have people want to spend time and feel comfortable sort of staying for longer periods of time. So I hope that answers your question. If not, please follow up in the chat. And if anyone else has questions, write them in the chat, and maybe I'll try to stop in about 10 minutes and we can get into a couple more questions. But quickly before we do that, I want to get into, I'm sharing some examples of stories and get into kind of how we craft that and what actually makes a compelling story. And so these are sort of 4 different components of how a story sticks. And I think this first piece is really about language and being able to really crisply tell your story in a way that people remember it. Next piece is about data, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about of these different public life methods, but being able to kind of analyze before and after and share stories of change is really impactful. And if there's not baseline data, which, oftentimes there's not opportunities for that, being able to, still use quantitative and qualitative data to measure impact, even if it's not a direct comparison to before and after. The next piece is about visuals, and maybe this can feel overwhelming to some that, it always has to be a drawing or a really sophisticated diagram, but that's actually not true. So illustrating with photos and videos ends up being a really compelling piece of it, which relates to the last one of really making it human. And again, like appealing to people's own human experience, making something really accessible is very important, and is often what gets people to remember and to stick with it. So I'm going to go through kind of what I mean by each of these, and if anything is confusing, please just write in the chat and we can go into it in a little bit more depth. But this first piece about making it stick and there being kind of some catchy language, we use this phrase of, opt for 5-year-old friendly language. So things that, a child can very easily understand, or somebody who has no idea about your project sees the headline and they get it and they're immediately bought in. So being direct with kind of a headline and then, following up with data in the sublines, it makes the most sense. But, you don't need to have data in your headline, but just overall, what is the takeaway here? And being extremely clear, so direct as possible, and understand, would a 5-year-old get what you're saying and be able to engage with it. Or, there's another avenue here of being able to go more broad and then diving into the findings a little bit more deep. So, having a shorter headline is good for, maybe if your findings are not as concrete yet, having a couple lines and then being concise with that and diving into the details in the subsequent lines. And so finding ways to, when you say this, when you make it stick and you have this short, concise piece, having data point to back it up. So, presenting a snapshot of findings of your project of, people feel really positively about that. It's important to not just say that and, that's something that you feel intrinsically because you think your project is well done, which I'm sure it is, but only say that, really if you have this data point of saying, 93 of the visitors here really felt positively about that place. I'm just going to skip ahead a couple slides because I know we're tight on time. So the next piece is about the data mix, right? And being able to have different kinds of data. So show, don't just tell. So being able to really clearly communicate changes over time. And I think sometimes I would say with graphs and quantitative data, think about what's most important to show here and organize the information based on that. So you might have collected a lot of data, but maybe it's not most important to show all of the data, right? And so don't try to make more than one point with the chart. So think about the point that you're making and then understand, what is the data point and what is the graphic that's going to most clearly illustrate this. And if you look at the examples on this page, they're fairly simple, right? But really clearly able to see kind of the difference or what's most important here. So I think, using quantitative data and charts and graphs to show hierarchy is what's most important here. The next piece again is about this, before and after. So this is the example that I had shared from Lexington of being able to show comparisons and that you're able to show apples to apples that, over the same, maybe it's years apart or whatever, but you can say weekday to weekday from before this project was implemented to after this project was implemented, we're able to see the change. So I think that's a pretty, that's not always easy to do right of the before, but if it's possible, even in a space where there is no life and you might be collecting data where again, you have one person staying per hour, you have a really minimal public life, it's still worth it because you can show this, kind of dramatic impact after. So this piece about photos, right? So bringing your data closer to earth and really grounding it in the human experience of like, show people what these numbers actually look like. I think sometimes, as designers and city officials, sometimes we can get too lost in the data and kind of assume that everybody relates to that. But being able to actually visualize, what does it look like when this place is packed versus what does it look like when it's really not and it's empty. So not everybody thinks in charts, right? So understanding, narrating through written and visual guidance will really help you better understand what you found. And this hits back to what I already said, but really, select what your most important data points are and make them pop and do that graphically as well, right? You can see with this charts, the most important information is the darkest and the biggest text here. So, sometimes it's not about showing everything, but just showing the most important thing. This piece here, this piece about, quantifying the qualitative data, I think is really important. I think sometimes people shy away from qualitative data. And if you were in the last session, we talked a little bit about, intercept surveys and interviews. And in my experience, those methods end up being sometimes more important than the quantitative data of of counting people in a space, of getting a sense of how people really feel about a place or engage with it. And but I think sometimes that can be scary, right? Because it's a little softer and it's a little more open-ended and looser. But doing things to kind of code people's input and categorize, so I talked to 50 people and then taking notes and understanding, bucketing actually. So this many people talked about things being calm and quiet. Other people talked about seating and kind of assigning a percentage of their responses to the theme of, not just what people share, but how many. It can start to bring some of that, the rigor that quantitative data has that people really relate to and decision makers respond to in particular, can apply that to qualitative data, which again is really critical. The next piece about making it visual. So showing change over time, and this over time is not just done with data, right? But with photos of how something looks before and after from the same vantage point. Showing how your space is kind of innovative from the norm. So showing, what maybe this thing looks like, and then what it typically looks like and how people perceive. In this case, it's like we're analyzing a school. So what a classroom usually looks like, and then what it looks like in this project, and show how that's different. Because I think sometimes, showing great urban spaces, if you don't show, what it was before, or, what really the innovation is here, then it doesn't always land for people why it's important and why it's transformative. There's another big thing about annotation, and a lot of these methods are really simple, right? But just being able to not just show the photo, but really call out, what's important here, and putting text on top of the photo and kind of stamp, an evaluation of what's making this space work and not work, to make it extra clear and extra accessible to people of why this works and what actually are the specific components that are working well here. Another thing is, diagramming of, how things work, and what are the patterns that you're observing in space, and how people are moving through space. So being able to, show, it doesn't have to be exact or scientific, but really show how people are engaging with the space and moving throughout is also, a really important piece. The last piece is about, is making it human. And so I think the title of this slide is perfect, right? That we're really emotional beings at heart, and playing to people's emotion is super important. So, okay, I just got a message that we have a little bit more time, which is great. I can slow down just a bit. But, I think this piece about, really appealing to kind of the gut reaction or the heart reaction is often how decisions get made, right? So always remember to really ground your data and ground your stories in the human experience. So bringing quotes from, open-ended responses and those conversations on the ground make it so important and really make it stick with people. And so, this example here, I think, is a wonderful way to show, we have the quantitative data that we've asked people, what's their sense of belonging, and do you feel like this is your place? We have these great numbers of, more than half of the people are saying yes, but this is what the yes looks like, right? And these are some examples of how that works. And then the people that, don't feel that way and feel a little bit neutral, this is what it is. So it gives a little bit more texture to these otherwise a little bit static charts. So I think, this layering on the quantitative, or the qualitative on top of the quantitative is really important. And so I think, and another piece is about anecdotes, right? And so, showcasing the soft side and impact of the project are often what sticks with people most. So this has a really important place in the assessment and impact. And the impact is not always, being able to capture it by numbers. This next piece is about humor, and sometimes making a joke or making a funny reference to really illustrate maybe the wild, like this is you can see the photo here, just a wild, really inhumane street in a part of the US. And so, we kind of have to really put people, in the mindset that this is a competitive sport, and this is actually like a bit comical, right? That we're asking people to cross the street, and that's not proper, and that's not a dignified experience. And so sometimes, elevating the problem out and bringing a little bit of humor and playfulness in it can actually get people behind the sort of the magnitude of what everyone's talking about. And sometimes, lastly, an image is all you need. And so, like this is from the Philadelphia, the porch swing project that I shared earlier. And it's a really nice image of somebody using the space, of a child using the space, and how that works well. And this is Splash Jam, the project in Lexington that I had shared. And, you can really see from this image that, children are using it, parents are there loving it, that this is a wonderful urban space. So, taking photos and not, I think sometimes designers have this urge to take photos when there's no other people around and it looks really pristine. But it's so important to capture, again, the life and how people are using the space. And so I almost have a rule for myself that if there's not people in the photo or using the space, don't take the picture, because it doesn't do doesn't do anybody any justice to only look at the form. Maybe there's certain circumstances where, making a technical decision where that makes sense, but even still, always, always, always layering on the life and kind of what the use is there is so important. So these are just some great examples of how, photos can really tell the story. And so sometimes, again, less is more, and just showing the photo and being able to speak to the story and how it works is the most impactful thing that you can do. And capturing, these wonderful moments of life is really important. So that's all for the presentation. And I see I have a couple questions in the chat. So I'm going to just I think we have 5 more minutes. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to run through those. But if this sparked any questions, please write them in the chat and I'll try to cover them in the next couple of minutes. But I'll also drop my email in the chat and feel free to write me directly. So this next piece about, somebody asked, does this process of collecting public life data tool include talking to people, spending time in this assessed public space as real stories that come from people themselves? If not, why? And absolutely is what I would say. As I mentioned, in my experience, oftentimes this qualitative piece and in a sense, the softer side of things really makes the most impact, and actually just getting a sense of how people feel about it. This kind of ethnographic observation from a distance can tell you a lot, but it can't tell you everything, right? And so just being able to talk to the people who are the everyday users and actually are the experts of the space, right? As someone who's assessing, you're not the expert in this place usually, unless it's, a really integrated part of your life. Maybe it is, but in most cases, the neighbors and the people that actually live in the space that know the most. And so talking to them is actually essential. And there's, hopefully you saw the first session, or there's a video recorded you can go back and see, but there's different ways to do that, right? And so we can do it with intercept surveys, we can do it with online surveys, but also, we can do it just with, on-site interviews and just having a couple questions to prompt and just really have conversations with people about what their experience is there. So I hope that answers your question. Then somebody asked, are some of these tips and these slides about creating stories available on Gehl's website? I actually don't believe that they are, but maybe that will change. I think if you go on our website, we have maybe a blog post or 2 about this, but I don't believe that there are slides online. But you can follow up with me on email, and I'm happy to share some of these slides with you. So let's see, there was a question in the beginning that I missed. I would like to know if public life data tool is accessible by urban space stakeholders themselves, mostly the general public, to share data in terms of spatial experience, feedback, problem sharing. That's a really excellent question. And, from Gehl's side of it, because the tool is in development and it's also used, from our lens and our projects, and it's not open, publicly accessible for a couple of different reasons. But I think that there are a lot of tools. There's some open source tools that do this, and I think different municipalities and different organizations, everyone sort of has their own way of collecting feedback and data, but I think, and even the public life tool, right? It's a way that we are able to collect public life data. We're now expanding it to be able to collect public space data. We have now made an iteration of the app to more directly understand, feedback and sense of belonging in a space. So I think, it's always evolving, but I think a lot of what I have learned in my experience of data collection is that there's not usually one silver bullet and one size fits all. And really the multi-method approach is most essential here. So that's what I would say is that, it takes more than just, the public life data tool. It also takes conversations with people spending time in the space, and it takes, high level GIS analysis, and it takes, interviews and focus groups and those kinds of more intimate conversations. So I hope that answers your question. And I'm not sure if anybody else has questions, but I think that maybe we have 1 or 2 more minutes. And I'm just going to write my email in the chat because I know we were cut a little bit short on time. And so if you have follow-up questions, please write me and let me know. Yeah, so somebody wrote, I feel like the app could be administered by Gehl, but be open to the public, and have people use their urban spatial concerns, and it could be more transparent and participated. And I absolutely agree. I think there's some nuance to figuring that out, and and kind of the scale that we work at and being able to manage that is that a lot of it is that we don't have the resources to keep it open kind of on that really large scale. But I think it's a wonderful idea, and that's something that we definitely will keep exploring. And I encourage you all to explore in your work of, what is the right open source, feedback, and how do we have people collect data and have transparency around the data that is being collected around them, and get their feedback on urban spaces. Wonderful. So I am going to close it out here. And again, if anybody has any more questions, please send me an email and I would be happy to follow up. And I hope that this was helpful. And you can, of course, head to the Gehl website to learn a little bit more about our public life and public space tools. Thank you so much.